Welcome to Listen Again, the Monitor Audio Group podcast. In this episode, I talk to Antony Bunn-Major from Chord Cables, based here in the UK. So, Antony, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun with this.
Yeah.
Antony, the listeners don't know that you and I used to work together at Monitor Audio Group, so this should be a really fun discussion. And we've got Michael Hedges, our technical director, joining us as well. Well, let's get straight into it. So, cables, hi-fi cables, integration, CI cables. This is a hot topic, isn't it? I mean, when you're buying audio, you often think about the sort of the big equipment first. And I think there are many benefits to having consideration over what sort of types of cables that you want to use. And I think there are many, many quality steps within that. So I have a very long list of questions here.
Great.
But for someone getting into high quality audio, what should they know about cables in the first instance that might not be immediately obvious? So if they're taking that first step into high fidelity and they've bought some nice speakers, they've bought a nice amplifier and a nice source, whatever it might be, a turntable or a streamer or something like that, where do they start with their cables, Antony?
I think obviously there's going to be an audition process. And it's important to not necessarily focus too much on the listening part, more on what you feel when you listen to your music, because we're all in this for the enjoyment of music, and I think hopefully all of us among us are really into our music. It's probably why we do what we do. But when you get the synergy right of a system, it's not all the little nuances or treble or bass or stereo separation, all that sort of thing. They are important, but really it's about what happens, how you feel emotionally when you listen to music. Are you more connected to it? So try not to think about all the technicalities too much as a beginner, because really what you want to do is be able to sit there, listen to your album and enjoy it all the way through and get really close to the music. When I joined Chord a couple of years ago, I kind of fell into this job as I've moved around a few times, and it wasn't my first choice. I'm an avid reader, or was, of a Facebook group called Audio Shite. Am I allowed to say shite on this?
I think so. Yeah. No, we'll let you have that one, Antony.
So Audio Shite, the forum, I used to read it for entertainment, really. Cables get a massive battering, and I was sort of pre-armed with this information when I went into this role, and I thought this is going to be tough. I know that we do a lot of active demonstrations to the public, and I was worried about the feedback, all that sort of stuff. But as it turned out, I was given my cable, my car stock, all the stuff that I keep in the boot that I carry around, and I had about 5 or 6 ranges of cables, going up to nearly our top of the range stuff. And I went home, and on my modest little system, which is probably £1,000 in total, I connected the cables up, going through the range, turned the equipment around as we do at our demo, so you can see the back, and I was doing all this stuff. And as I went through the ranges, yes, there were, particularly at the beginning, some obvious differences. I started to really think, oh, wow, I want to listen to this album, or I want to go do this. And I wasn't necessarily, like I said before, wasn't necessarily listening out for stereo separation or this, whatever this.
Those little nuances that so many audiophiles love.
I just was, this album, I forgot about this. And I went up to cables that were probably in total 4 times the cost of the electronics, which, as you said, are the shiny, exciting things that people like, and cables often take a back seat. But yeah, I'm going off on one here.
It's fine.
Back to the original question. Listen to the music. Don't listen to the equipment. You want it to disappear. That's what I'd give you on that one.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And Michael, obviously when you're designing crossovers and physical speakers, obviously we there are cables within those things internally. I mean, what are some of the considerations from a design perspective that you think about? And then we'll go, I've got a long list of questions, we'll go into further stuff about the physical cables themselves. But I mean, at this early point in the discussion, I mean, what considerations do you have from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's some basic things you want to meet with a set of cables. You want to make sure they transmit that signal without degrading it. It's your primary concern with connecting two pieces of equipment together. And when we're considering that internally in our speakers, which is the area we deal with cables, we don't deal with cables outside the speaker really. We're making sure that they're the correct gauge of wire, they're of a good quality of copper, they have good quality jackets on them, they're not going to have degrade over time. You know, those types of things are quite engineering focused because it's something that's hidden inside the speaker. We want to make sure that it hits a point for each grade of speaker. So obviously there's changes in cable as you go up our ranges that are inside the speaker. But we're making sure that it's very focused on engineering solution. I think going back to what Antony said earlier, though, it's really, really key here. Like if you're coming into this for the first time, don't get too hung up on getting stuck on it. You've probably spent a long time thinking about your speakers and your electronics, and then you've gone, oh, cables. But enjoy it. Get what you can, get what you can afford, enjoy it, because you can come back and change your cables easy. There's something you can play with, there's something you can change, share with your friends. You know, there's something that you can easily move around. So don't get too hung up on them, but make sure you want to, on your first system, you want to make sure you've got something of good quality. You know, that they're of good thickness, they're not thin, rubbishy wire. You know, they've got good performance metrics, which, to be honest, all the brands are meeting those basic requirements on anything from the entry level up. You're only really going to have a problem if you go on Amazon and pick something really cheap. Yeah. And then you're going to work through that process. You want something that's appropriate for the price points you're spending on. But yeah, from an engineering point of view...
And is that a thing, Antony? I mean, price points?
I don't agree with it. Make it appropriate. The cables are the most important part of the system.
No, of course, yeah. You know, like levelling cables to system matching in terms of price point, because as you mentioned, you do a huge range of cables. And, you know, I've got a question here about sort of the hype. And as you said earlier on within that forum, you know, cables come under a lot of scrutiny, don't they? And some people can hear a benefit, maybe some can't. But, you know, is there a way that we could maybe dispel some of the scepticism around that in our discussion? And, you know, is it warranted? Because, you know, I think we've all probably sat in lots of different cable demonstrations. Maybe, actually, Antony, can you take us through a demonstration? And what you do to show people the steps in performance that, you know, they could achieve through...
Happy to.
Up through your ranges.
Happy to, yeah, absolutely. So usually we'll do a closed-door demonstration at hi-fi shows, so we get a proper captive audience where people can focus on the music. And in training sessions also with some of my customers. We'll go through the ranges, so usually we'll talk about looms. So that will be, for example, analog interconnects and the speaker cable loom. So you've got, because we do ranges of power, everything's all divided into ranges now, which makes things a lot easier. So I'll do analog interconnects and speaker cable, for example, and then I'll play a piece of music, a minute and a half, something like that, play the first 30 seconds of that track again, change the cables up to the next range, then I'll play that track again. That's the only thing I'm changing in the system. And then let people hear the differences for themselves. As you know, as a team, we have our different ways of extracting people's feedback from those listening sessions, but we try to be really open and honest about it. So I strongly believe, because I've done it myself, that they do indeed make a difference, and the majority of people are like, wow, okay, yeah, and they get it. So that's kind of how it works. And then the next cable demonstration I'll do in the range up, I'll change to a new piece of music just to keep it fresh. It's not any tricks. I'm not trying to, do any kind of magic there. Just, it's for my benefit as well. When you think you're doing 8 demos a day and you play the same track over and over and over, by the end of it, I think I would be a flop. And I do feel the same for the audience listening. So, yeah, change the track, play a minute and a half or 2 minutes, whatever, until it gets to the body of the thing. Play the first 30 seconds. And then usually when I play the track again with the upgraded cable, I know, I can feel it straight away. It's got something better about it. Almost like that's the take the musician did that was better, almost. There's something, I try not to think in terms of frequencies and, it's a black background or the stereo imaging and all that sort of thing. Just try to elicit sort of like a response, emotional. How does it make you feel? Yeah. Which one did you prefer? Which take did you prefer, if you like? That's kind of how I look at it.
And do you think that because you have all these steps, and if someone is walking into sort of building a system, we touched on sort of alignment of cables, how important is that? Sorry. Because you could spend an awful lot of money on a cable, but it could be too good for your system. Is that a thing?
No, well, I didn't find that experience, but that aside and money aside, so Michael knows more about this than I do, but any cable in your system requires a conductor or a pair of conductors. That's copper usually, because it's a very good conductor and it's cost effective. Then you have your jacket around there. Then we have the insulation, or sometimes referred to as the dielectric. And then you might have some kind of screening. Now, if I go back to copper being the conductor, copper is also a very good aerial. So if you run a couple of long, and in the case of speaker cable, long runs of copper without any kind of screening, you run the risk of it getting interference from RF and EMI and Bluetooth, all these different things we've got in our rooms now that they weren't probably as apparent in the 70s when hi-fi probably had its beginnings. So screening the cable, I think, is important at some level. Mm-hmm. So if you can look for a screened cable, you can do a quick demo between, I don't know if they still do 42 strand and 79 strand, which is just unscreened copper. Do that against a screen cable, and you should be getting some positive results.
That's very interesting.
So is that the answer you're looking for?
Well, that's very interesting. That's a very interesting point, and I imagine that my point was more about sort of, so if someone's building a system, they've taken all of that into account, because I think that's a very valid explanation. But should they care more about the cost? Because I know that obviously the quality will go upwards, as will the cost as you step up through your ranges. And you found that there was a marked improvement with your own system, even going from sort of your entry to your top end stuff. But the reality is that obviously, should people, a bit like a buyer's guide, a helpful tip, should they align their system pricing to the cable pricing? Does that give them a base to go, I think this is going to be the right type of cable and work well with my system? Or is it more like you say, actually there are fundamentals that they should be looking at first, despite the cost of these things, because that could get you a much better result, and therefore you then need to make a decision on whether or not that's going to be right for your pocket ultimately.
Yeah, sure, I see what you're saying. So and I've worked in retail too. We used to allocate something like between 5 and 10% towards cables. It's a rule of thumb. If in an ideal world, every customer that buys your speakers or my cables would have a thorough demonstration and proper facility and be given the opportunity to listen to this and that. And quite often they do get the chance to hear electronics and speakers, because that's the thing that looks like it's expensive and worth the money. Cables, I don't know how many of my retailers, as much as I train them and push them to do this, would sit and do a cable demonstration, certainly to the extent that we go to. So it does get a backseat, and you do have to, try and give the customer advice as somebody working in retail. So I'd say that's a kind of good general rule of thumb. Somewhere, depending on the level of system, between 5 and 10%, if you allocate that to cables, you will not be holding your system back.
Yeah.
I think, sorry if I just jump, I think that's a key thing. I wouldn't want anyone to be unhappy with the system because they think that the cable's holding the system back.
Yeah.
That would be we want people to enjoy their audio and to really listen to it and to be absorbed with it. I think sometimes you can get that little mental thing that says, oh, have I got that right? Have I got that right? So I wouldn't want someone to be in that scenario, and that could cause a problem with the experience. And sometimes those things can really get you down, and they shouldn't, because we want to enjoy the music.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's the end game, isn't it, for all of us, doing all of these different types of products.
Can I just jump in again?
Yes,
I just want to. So personally, I absolutely agree with where you're coming at in terms of like the pricing and things like that. But I think where people need to think twice with cables is where you're starting to look at that next jump up in loudspeakers. So generally speaking, loudspeakers are they're the worst thing in your system, engineering-wise. They're the thing that produces the most distortion. They're the thing that's got the most issues. Later on comes some of the electronics and things. Where you're in a situation where you might be able to, say, buy the next grade up of loudspeaker, you're getting into the next price point. If that difference is the price of cable you're looking at spending on the previous speaker, I think that's where you need to start thinking, should I be going up? And I don't mean that as a manufacturer, I mean that in a sense of performance jumps. Your system's probably going to take a bit more of a step forward if you're looking at spending that amount of money. When you're getting into 50% of your speaker price is your cable, or 75% of your speaker price, you really then starting to think about buying the next speaker up. Like there's a point where you're looking at the system experience.
Obviously, I completely disagree. No, of course, that's common sense. Sometimes, though, with amplifiers or some of the electronics, you could spend an extra $2,000 to go to the next range up, and you might get more power delivery, or you might get more, I don't know, dynamics or whatever from your source component. But quite often when I do these, particularly open days at retailers where you get end users there and they talk about what systems they've got, perhaps we'll have one that's the same as theirs, and I'll put in an upgraded cable, not silly money at all, just a couple of levels up from maybe what they're using. And all of a sudden they hear details that they didn't hear before, then that's obviously breathing more life into the electronics. I've never thought about it from a speaker point of view, but I think absolutely.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to say, okay, I've heard that demo and I heard it breathe some life into my system, but what I didn't listen to was the cable I've got with the next speaker up.
Yeah.
Or the speaker I've got and the cable I've got with the next amp up type thing.
Yeah.
Where do I place my money when I'm spending my money?
Yeah,
that's
where do you prioritise? Because I think that is...
It's only you as a customer can only answer that. And again, it comes down to, I wouldn't want to put pressure on people to spend that money in a certain area that then they question and they don't enjoy the music. Like, if you're comfortable spending that there, and that's what's letting you enjoy the music, that's what we're all here for.
Yeah.
Be comfortable with it.
No, true.
And
yeah.
So on the isolation, actually, because I'm going to throw something out there, because I saw a demonstration, and they had these little bridges underneath the cable that was on the floor.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know.
Oh, the supports.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
how do you feel about
if
that?
people want to support the cables with wooden blocks, then there might be something in it in terms of microphonics. We don't use them in our R&D room or anything like that, but there may be a place for them. Never say never.
Well, it's just because yes, you're quite right. You were talking about the sort of looking out for the sort of isolation and the cable runs, and I had this image in my mind of this one demonstration that I saw where they had the cable on the floor, snaked across the floor to the speakers, and they were all sat on these little bridges. It was most impressive.
Yeah, looks good.
I mean, I'll just jump in and say...
What do you think about it, Michael?
I've got technical background, and I wouldn't even bother wasting my time on it. Yeah. I think the cable's the thing that's actually taking the signal. We can talk about how does microphonics get into a system, and there is a place for that. But
don't pull any punches, Michael. It's fine.
The cables are engineered well in the first place. They're dealing with that in the cable. Like, you're engineering the cables to make sure that they're not doing that in the first place. So you could, and some of these things, the price points for them, it's not like someone's gone out in the shed and just got some wooden blocks and put them under there, and they cost some serious money. And you've got to, again, look, for whatever that is, should you have spent your money somewhere else?
Yeah.
I'm going to remain impartial, so as not to offend anybody out there that might be using our cables as cable lifters.
No, that's fine. We're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
I think that's where we can MJ can take the more different approach to it, and I can
Yeah.
give my opinion in here, and we've got three of
So
us
no,
here.
I don't believe that's a fundamentally important part of the speaker cable. It is. When I talked about screening or I don't know if I mentioned isolation, but screening or sometimes known as shielding,
Yeah.
that's a barrier between RF and your cable.
Yeah.
That's the screening part. The dielectric is the plastic insulation that goes around the cables. That I believe, and Michael, you can correct me, the best dielectric would be air. Unfortunately, you can't run, it's physically impossible to run copper cables and make them work in air. So we have to find a material that pays, that gives, without interfering with the signal as much as possible. And phase stability is really important. So we use materials as an insulation. That makes, I've heard it myself, make a massive difference to the overall sound of the system. And we've got cables back at base where we do training with our retailers, and they have different dielectrics only. It's the only thing that's different. We'll do the demo, and you can hear the difference.
Wow. Yeah,
So
that's very interesting.
that's a big part of it too. But screening, I think, is something maybe as a rule of thumb. So shielding the cable from the outside RF and EMI, stuff like that.
It's very interesting, and a great place to start your sort of research as an end customer to sort of understand the different qualities within each cable and what that can achieve. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, those are the things that I think would matter most to someone sort of starting to sort of develop their knowledge about sort of what type of cable and how it can benefit their system. Let's talk about termination, because there are different variations of termination on cables. And is there a go-to that most people should try to consider, or are they actually all the same? I mean, obviously they do the same thing. They terminate the speaker cable. You put it into your speaker terminal on the back of your product. But is it a spade? Is it a plug?
I see. Yeah, well, different. That side of things is a little bit of playing around, and people have their own preferences. But in terms of the plug itself, we use a material that we've called core alloy. It's basically a silver-based alloy. The issue with using silver, and it's a great conductor, obviously, that's why they use it on plugs quite often, silver-plated plugs. But you get no oxidation with silver. It tarnishes. So you end up with a physical barrier between the connector and in this case, the banana plug. So we've developed this alloy that doesn't tarnish, and that obviously has a positive effect. You want the banana plug to be as tight fitting as possible into the plug, so you don't have as little air around that connection as possible. And then the plugs we use are crimp fitted. So where the cable goes into the plug, I'm using a lot of sign language here.
It's very good. I like it.
Yeah. So when it's crimped, the idea is that it's almost a vacuum there. So the cable that goes in, there's no space around it at all. So you get the biggest benefits possible in terms of connectivity. And then the type of plug we use on some of the particularly interconnects, that is also exposed metal as well at each end. So we use plugs that act as a barrier as well at that point. So every part of that cable cannot be exposed to RF and EMI. That's something else that we consider.
Very interesting. Do you have any comments on that, Michael, from your preference?
I think
and your
if
experience?
you're looking at your entry point into cables, you want to be looking at cables that got connectors that aren't going to tarnish. It's a very, very straightforward scientific problem. If a layer builds up an oxidization layer or a tarnishing layer inside the connector, between the connector and the speaker, then you're going to be degrading that connection. So your first base call is gold-plated connectors, and on cheaper cables that can be quite a low-grade gold plating. And this is where going with a branded cable is really quite good, because that brand's going to have made sure they've done the testing. It's properly gold-plated, or they might have another technology like yourselves. And there's a few different things flying around. I'm not familiar with everybody's, but they're all trying to do the same thing. You're trying to create a connection between the two metal parts that won't degrade over time. And that's something that's really worth spending some money on and making sure is done correctly, because it will change your speaker, your connection over time. It's also another one that people probably don't do that often. It's worth unplugging your speakers and plugging them back in every now and again, because it breaks down, if there is any build-up of tarnish or corrosion on the connectors, it breaks the corrosion down again. And you can sometimes you can hear just unplugging the cables. If they've been sat there for 3 years and you've unplugged the cables and plugged them back in again, that can have an impact.
No, that's a good tip. I think that's a really interesting tip, and something that I'll have to do now when I get home.
Yeah. We're getting a little bit geeky now, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. So, guys, I mean, Anthony, are there any measurements that prove a cable is performing well, or is this still largely subjective, like you were saying at the beginning of the discussion?
Well, at the moment, unfortunately, there's no reading that we can get that delivers a great result in terms of a nice sounding cable, if you like. Mm-hmm. So you could have the best shielding, the best material, for example, all silver, get all the things right that physics say let's do, because that should equal the best cable with the least interference or whatever, that kind of stuff. But then when it comes to listening, which is a big part of the R&D at Chord, the guys in there, as part of a development process for a new cable, there's lots and lots of hours of listening. And a cable like that just can sound, and as we've experienced, it will sound flat or just lifeless, or something's not right. So you can apply science, but then you also have to, so it's a bit of both really. You have to listen. Listening is obviously the most important part, not just putting things on a meter and looking at the readout. You need to actually go and listen. In fact, even down to when we get raw cabling, because we're not a cable plant, and we import cables from all across the world. So raw cable will come in, and from every drum, the guys will make an interconnector or speaker cable, whatever, and it's listened to in the demonstration room. And we don't really understand why necessarily, or I don't. I'm the sales guy. This is the story. And the guys will go to the demo room and they'll check the direction of the cable. And maybe it's something to do with the way the copper's extruded, but it will sound better one way or the other. And then they'll mark up in terms of production which way the cable needs to be manufactured from that point on. Right. So even down to that level. Then the guys in research and development have tested solder, made cables with different types of solder, and they found one that they preferred the sound of. I mean, down to the whatever level we can go down to, we will consider anything. So, it's important to us that we get it right.
Well, it's very, I mean, you've just echoed exactly, I think, the system approach that we take with our loudspeaker design, well, and electronics and furniture in some ways, Michael. I mean, it's like, ultimately you're looking at every small detail which builds the sum of all the parts together to provide that emotional connection to the music or the movie that you're watching, listening.
I think from a scientific point of view, there's a wide gap, and I think anyone who's in psychoacoustics and studies that, there's a wide gap between what we understand and what we can measure and what we actually hear. We don't have a solution for measuring a loudspeaker and giving you subjective quality. There isn't that link. Now, we do have hundreds of different measurements we can make on products that steer us towards that subjective quality thing. We have some things that correlate really well, and we have some things that correlate very unwell. And when we're designing a loudspeaker, we have lots of components that we can see the correlation on. And so we spend the money on the things we can see the correlations on in order to generate that better loudspeaker. And there are things in there when you get more and more and more expensive where you start creeping into that subjectivity. We can't measure this anymore, but we've done some listening tests and we feel this is the right direction. And part of the problem with the overall sort of marketing, sales, how you deal with cables is that once you get above a certain engineering threshold, it does become immeasurable again. So you're in that point where we don't have a system. We don't fully understand how the ear works, and we don't have a set of objective things that take us from A to B. And so, companies like Chord, you're in that subjective environment of having to use your ears and deal with it and make judgment calls on which one's better and how we structure your range. And there's very largely things that do cost more money to make better. That's unfortunately how engineering works often. But it's not. And I think so. Just spin back round to the beginning. We can have the argument that engineering says there is no difference. If a cable's low resistance, it's fine. And I think if you're happy with that and that gives you the best enjoyment of the loudspeaker, great. But I can say, as someone who's sat in lots of listening rooms, listening to lots of loudspeakers on lots of different cables, you can hear things you can't explain. And you can do that in scenarios that are, double blind. So scenarios where you don't know what you're listening to. And you can have a preference for one or the other. Whether I would then, how I personally would equate that to money I spend on a system is a personal choice, I think, of how I've... And I take personally in my system at home, I use slightly cheaper cable as long as it's met engineering goals, because I feel comfortable with that and I still enjoy my music with that. But there are people who want to spend the money on the cable there and have and attributed that subjective difference. And it's complicated because I can't tell someone you're wrong and you're not wrong, and no one is wrong in this environment. And I can't tell you from an objective point of view, from a measurement point of view, which cable's better or which loudspeaker is better, for that matter of fact, in many cases, or even which amplifier is better. So we do, unfortunately, in the audio world, operate in this area of science where it's not fully understood yet. And we're getting better at it every single year. And companies like us and Chord are trying to apply as much science as possible to these things. But it's difficult, and we're researching it, and we're working hard on trying to make sure we can go to a customer and say, look, actually, we've done as much work as we possibly could, and there are reasons why this is better. Yeah. But it's a challenge.
And this is why there's so many different systems out there in terms of all components, speakers, because there is no such thing as a perfect loudspeaker, for example.
No.
If there was, there'd probably just be one brand, and that would be the best, and no one else could touch it.
Yeah, and we're dealing with people's preferences on things. Yeah. It's the same in many industries. The automotive industry is no different. There's not one sports car because it's the one that goes fastest. Because there are so many factors to a car that other than just speed. And emotional connection to the car, to the road, to the feeling is one of them.
Yeah.
And we deal with that same subjective emotional connection. We're trying to get make that emotional connection to the music. We're trying to do it, and we've got this group of products that we're pulling together, a package, a solution, and we're trying to make that best solution that fits that customer's needs, that delivers for them that experience.
So do you think, I'm going to throw in a question that I've had a few times when we've been doing demonstrations and things about diminishing returns. The better quality my system, the more money I spend on it, do I really see the return of that? Can I still hear it? Is it that much better because it's that much more money? Can I really pinpoint that? I mean, on this discussion, I mean, it's I hear it often. It comes up all the time. Is it a greater improvement at a lower end because maybe the components aren't as good? And when you start adding in a better component, or whether it's a loudspeaker, whether it's electronics, whether it's a cable, when you start to get up to a certain level of price but also performance, is it still that noticeable?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Definitely does happen, but as you go up in terms of ranges with us, and the same from loudspeaker design and electronics, the components that you're putting into it to get that little bit more out of the system end up costing more money, and that's why at that level there is this thing of diminishing returns, absolutely. But just buy what you're comfortable with and enjoy it, I think, is the message I'd give.
I think there's another element of this that we have skipped past it. We've talked performance the whole time. And I've talked from loudspeakers first, and I'll let you chime in on that from a cable point of view second. But from loudspeaker, you're buying a piece of furniture at the end of the day as well. So when you buy a platinum over a gold, you're not just buying a better sounding speaker, it's a better looking speaker, it's a better piece of furniture, it's got piano finishes rather than flat gloss finishes. It's a different beast in that sense. So not all of your money always goes into making it a performance argument. And I think the same, I mean, I'll let you...
Well, yeah, it's less so with... Nobody likes wires or cables going around the room particularly. But there is obviously a big part of the process in terms of designing a cable is trying to make it look nice. And there's lots of different methods we use there. We don't have the same flexibility as you do with the loudspeaker, because architecturally it can look different. There's lots of different things you can do there. Really, with a speaker cable or an interconnect, you can add a different colour jacket or braid, and you're limited to trying to get the cable to perform to its best without compromising anything. So they're not everybody's favourite cables. I know it always makes me laugh when we do the shows. We've got our equipment facing the other way, and we usually put on a really nice system, so there's quite a few boxes there, and all of our cables are there front and foremost of the display, and people are like that with their wives trying to get them into the idea of having a hi-fi system.
Yeah, right.
It's still relevant. I don't want to, I know we're living in the 21st century and stuff, but it is a consideration. You can see the wives' horrified look as they see all of these wires sticking out the back of the system. To us, they look beautiful, obviously, but it's more difficult for us. Really, it's a smaller influence on how the cable's designed, I think. Hopefully, speaking for Chord, it's more about the performance of the cable. Because most of the time they're not seen; they're around the back of the system. It's only really loudspeaker cable that may be out on the show.
That almost forms some of your brand identity, I suppose. In that's how you see your cables. There are other cable companies that are a bit more maybe jewelry based.
Yeah,
and so
perhaps,
I think that's admirable in one respect, isn't it? It's going after the performance.
Yeah, I mean, when you buy a flagship music cable, the jacket is nice. It does look like a quality product. The packaging is really important, obviously. The fact that it's got a certificate saying it's been signed off by one of the engineers and listened to. All of that stuff really helps. Then, of course, it gets plugged into the back of your system and it's not seen for a while. But if you're spending a large amount of money, or any type of money, you want the packaging and everything else to look good, and it's very important these days, and we do pay a lot of attention to that.
We do as well. That experience from the point of sale all the way through to the first point of turning it on, really, is hugely important. Whether it's taking your loudspeaker home or your cable home, that experience starts at the point you left the shop, or even in the shop half the time. But and it has to be considered.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, Antony, what do you think is going to be next for the cable industry? Are there any emerging trends or materials that you guys have been looking at that could take you to that next performance level?
There's always development going on in terms of improving what we do in terms of range, the basic stuff, so loudspeakers, interconnects, digital cables, streaming cables, etc. I think most recently we've started to look at more opportunities in terms of specific cables between systems. So, for example, we've done these for a long time, Burndy connections, which is a power connection between name equipment. We make custom cables of those that ours are screened, and some of them have different dielectrics inside to hopefully enhance performance that way. We're looking at subwoofer cables now as well, not just your basic RCA cables, but for example RAL and their Nutric connection. We're looking at those. All sorts of stuff. Inuos do a power cable between the statement. We make a version of that we think is improved. So those sort of developments are kind of picking up pace a little bit now.
Can you work with these other manufacturers in alignment, in development with them as well?
Not necessarily. We can, because most wires we can make as long as we can get hold of the connectors. So we'll get a cable in. Sometimes it's with the manufacturer, and I know that Name are obviously aware that we do the Burndy cables. They're not going to promote them because they make their own, obviously, but we just offer an alternative. Riga, we do a DC cable, so from the power supply for the Planner 3, for example, we do a screened DC cable, and that's quite easy to do an A/B demo, and I do that often. All those sort of things are quite exciting and gives us a different edge, I think, to other cable manufacturers. And also we've got our English Electric brand, which is the sister brand of Chord. It's a small product profile, but we do a network switch, and just recently we've done a network isolator called the E1, and more recently and a better version, if you like, called the E1 Plus that I've been doing at shows recently. So those are more, not filter products, but products steering away from just cables. So we're looking at reducing noise, I guess, in different ways. So constantly innovating. We've done a grounding device for turntables, for the ground from turntables, which we've just recently launched.
Oh, right.
Which is doing really well.
Yeah, I mean, vinyl is very popular at the moment, isn't it?
So yeah, we're constantly looking for ways to keep people excited and, keep it going. So yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Michael, do you have any last comments?
Caught me off guard there a little bit. No, I was just
We've
listening
reached
to Andy.
the end of the question.
We have. I mean, Antony, is there anything further that you want to add, maybe that we haven't touched on, that you feel that would be, useful for our audience to know?
Well, I think there's a couple of points that we talked about in terms of choosing cables. Really, pick a good retailer.
Yeah.
And
get a demonstration. Right? That's going to be key.
And also, another thing that I haven't mentioned is a good retailer should lend you stuff to take home. It's important with cables. You can get a good idea in a listening room with loudspeakers and electronics, perhaps, but if you want to experiment with cables without investing all your money and making that decision in the shop, ask to borrow cables and do those demonstrations yourself so that you're comfortable with it. That's really important. So yeah, I think we've covered most things.
It's great. Well, I really appreciate your time, and I know some of the questions that we threw at you previously were quite detailed, and I think we've covered an awful lot. And hopefully, there's going to be something in there for people that are coming into audio for the first time. You might be able to give them a bit of a steer on where to start, and hopefully there might also be some good tips on how to improve the system that people already own. So, Anthony, once again, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we'll see each other soon, no doubt.
Yeah, we will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching this latest episode of Listen Again. If you liked it, please like, comment and subscribe so that you can stay up to date with all the latest episodes.